Welcome to the 9/11 tribute. I've got a beautiful Crystal on board. Boy, I wish you guys could see her. She's gorgeous, young, and traveling to Berlin. And I asked her about her experiences of 9/11. And she's a bit young for it, but she was in middle school. And she does have some recollection, and it actually leads into what she does in life. And that's what she's going to be doing in Berlin. Crystal, tell us about it.
So I'm going to a conference in Berlin. First of all, so I'm a PhD candidate in English language and literature, and I work in a field called disability studies, which is a cultural studies field, sort of much in the same model of, women and gender studies, critical race studies. It's about sort of social constructions of disability and disability as identity. So my focus, my research is on dementia and representations of dementia in contemporary literature. And so the conference I'm going to is a literary conference, and it's interdisciplinary, and it focuses on dementia, violence, and the politics of memory. So a lot of the speakers are working with, say, representations of dementia in Holocaust literature by Susan Schultz, and it's a book that was written during the Bush administration, and it is, in part a critique of sort of U.S. imperialism and actions in Iraq, and sort of ways of remembering tragedy, but also about her mother's Alzheimer's disease. And so I'm interested in sort of what kind of metaphorical work is dementia doing. Is it merely standing in for this sort of anxiety around cultural amnesia, of losing our nation, or are there ways to sort of value this embodiment of dementia and forgetting as something imaginative and creative and something that sort of opens up into different worlds of connection?
Well, that's a mouthful. What do you think of the tragedy itself? As far as, have you seen any documentaries on the conspiracy end of it or the realistic end of it?
I honestly don't pay attention to the conspiracy theory stuff.
So I had an engineer in this morning that I interviewed, and he said it's not physically possible to melt that heavy duty steel with jet fuel.
Yeah, my whole sort of interest in the event isn't sort of like to disprove or prove,
Yeah, I know that.
This or that, but I'm more interested in sort of, I guess, the symbolicism afterwards, or that revolves around it.
Have you been to the site?
I have not.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so the studies you're doing, you mentioned a Holocaust, or this is a bit of a Holocaust, obviously, or tragedies, regarding not remembering them. You think we want to? There's an effect to forget them.
I'm sort of interested in this injunction that we live in a moment right now of the injunction to never forget, right? That's something that's part of the discourse around 9/11. And certainly, we don't ever want to forget what happened, and we don't ever want to forget these people. The sort of quandary that injunction sets up for me that I'm interested in how literature then deals with that need to remember is, well, then what happens to sort of our aging populations or our young populations that literally can't remember, right? So the population with Alzheimer's, right? How do they become devalued, even dehumanized, pathologized because of these huge anxieties and pressures to remember? The sort of discourse and metaphors around Alzheimer's and dementia and memory loss is it's the silver tsunami. It's sort of, you have the zombie imagery, you have the fate worse than death. You have all of these rhetorics around it that parallel much of, say, the rhetoric of cancer and AIDS earlier on in the previous century, which, Susan Sontag wrote illness as a metaphor, and that's sort of this great reconstruction of that. So I think that in 21st century, Alzheimer's as a metaphor is sort of at the fore. So I'm really just kind of interested in, well, this pressure to never forget. How does that literally affect people's lives, our perception, the stigma around memory loss, right?
Right. So this conference, who's sending you to it?
I'm at the University of Michigan.
Oh, okay.
So
people
sort
from
of
all over the world.
That's who I'm representing. But yeah, it is. I'm pretty sure there's people from the UK going. There's other people from the US, as well as people who are already in Germany. It's part of It's put on by a group called Pathographics. Pathographics, and it's sort of they study representations of illness and disability in literature, film, comics. It's very, very interdisciplinary.
Well, you're in store for some eye-opening stuff, right?
Yeah, and Pathographics is also, people who are sort of working in that field, there's this whole other discipline called, well, it's new, very new in the past several years that's come up. It's called graphic medicine. And it's this sort of group of, there's some academics, literary scholars, other people in the healthcare field, medical doctors, and they all got together and they have this website called Graphic Medicine, and it turned into a conference and a book series, and it's sort of illness, disability at the intersections of healthcare and comics, as in comic books.
Graphic medicine, huh?
Graphic medicine, yeah. So there's all these little branch-offs in the field that I'm working in, because disability studies, it's sort of more, it's applied and also, in various humanities disciplines and social science disciplines, but also there's medical humanities, then there's health humanities, there's graphic medicine, there's all of these little...
So after you finish your studies, which will be, in a year or so?
I am hoping to finish by next year.
What will you do then? Do you have a job offer? Or
no, I haven't gone on the job market yet, but I'm hoping to apply for, say, a lectureship at the end of the year, end of next year.
A teaching
something
thing.
like that, yeah.
You want to teach?
Yeah.
And what will you teach?
I will probably teach in English. Yeah.
Well, you've got some work cut out for you.
Yeah.
The world needs a lot of positivity, as you can see my movement, It needs a lot of repair. I think we have a greedy, litigious society that doesn't see very far in front of them. They're just seeing the day in front of them. As far as they're not living their lives. They're living for the future. They're not living, in the moment. It's a shame. There's a lot of if you watch my channel, got a lot of philosophies from doing what I've done, being through what I've been through.
Yeah.
On how to look at life. And it's a beautiful thing, but unfortunately, there's not enough people giving. Everybody wants to take.
Yeah. So when you say living in the moment, I think that's a really interesting. That's really interesting and sort of related to a lot of the works that I've been reading that have to do with a character with dementia. Is that the ones that I find interesting are the ones that are using the character to sort of bring us into the now of living, where it's not necessarily focused on, how much do you remember from the past, right? Or what do you think about looking to the future, right?
Yes,
it's about
I really don't have a past.
Yeah, well, it's about, well, there's different ways of. I think that's also sort of a misconception, right? So my grandfather had dementia, and he would it's not that he didn't have a past, it's that he'd bring his past into the present in really different ways, right? Like random non sequitur type things from his past would jump in out of nowhere, and and it's a different relationship to time, which I think is interesting, and that's what my book is also.
So explain to the layman listening between dementia and Alzheimer's.
Sorry?
Explain to the layman listening the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's.
So Alzheimer's disease is sort of, a specific impairment that is describing. Dementia is sort of a more general symptom of memory loss, and also different kinds of, they could be mobility impairments, right? Or they can sort of be cognitive challenges of recall or differentiating between certain logics, right? So it's a more general category. So you could have, say, senile dementia but not have Alzheimer's.
Okay.
It's a very specific, quote-unquote, symptom.
And again, what are the cures for any of these? Nothing. There's no cures, or?
No, I mean, and that's the thing, is that there's this intense war rhetoric that surrounds, dementia. We must find the cure at all costs. It's the enemy we must fight, right? And that in itself is problematic, and somewhat dehumanizing also. That it sort of, I think focusing just on cure for any kind of thing, right? Whether it's Alzheimer's or something else, cure takes away from thinking about accessibility, inclusion, and sort of more things that are about sustaining, right?
Interesting.
And also, I'll put my disability studies hat away soon, but I tend also not to use the word lame, because lame also is a disability metaphor, right? And so what do you mean when you say lame, right?
Lame would be, my definition of lame would be kind of like idiotic,
Right. So here's the thing about, like, spreading positivity, I think, is also about looking at our language and how our language might make others feel, or what it's doing to sort of oppress people, whether we realize it or not. So my dad walks with a limp, right? He's lame. So when someone uses the word lame to describe something, it's like, oh, all right, so my dad's like the epitome of that, right? Even though it's not a literal usage, right? But it's still, the metaphor carries weight. It's the same thing as when people would say, or still do say, oh, hey, that's gay. Oh, hey, that's retarded, right? It's sort of the same kind of thing. I had this one experience where I was showing a prospective grad student around, and they walked with a cane and had, a visible limp, right? They were lame, right? And I introduced them to a friend, and I was like, oh, this person wants to come here, blah, blah, blah. And we were, talking at the university and whatnot. And my friend had not seen this person walk yet, right? And so she was sort of like talking about, the public transportation in the city, and she goes, oh yeah, but it's like super lame, blah, 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 blah. And I looked at the prospective grad student's face, and their face was just like, this embarrassment, this sort of like, you know what I mean? Like, you could see that inner cringe inside,
I didn't actually know a limp was lame. But people don't even know.
No. And that's the thing, is we have all these metaphors in our language all the time, and we don't really think about them. Right? But our language is totally inflected with ableist, sexist, racist stuff, right? It's just, we grow up with it. We don't examine it. People don't draw attention to it. It's, but I guess that's what me as a English...
Well, did you read the book, The Four Agreements?
No, I haven't.
You should read that book. The first one is be impeccable with your word, and the words you say, of course, translate what your feelings are. And it's very important to know those words that come out of your mouth, how they affect people. Be intentional
with your words,
Yes. Yeah. It's a great book. It's a hit for decades.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But we're almost ready to drop you off for Berlin. So how are you today?
I'm fantastic.
And how are you going to be the rest of your life?
Fantastic. And I'll always remember this.
Today is the first day of the rest of your life. You will never forget someone who's fantastic, even if you make them just once. And that's what I've learned through all these thousands of people I've been interviewing. And the word means unimaginably good, just so you know. And it is a magical word that makes you smile and makes other people smile. And if you can make one person smile today, you've done good. Make 10 people smile today, you've done great. Make more than that, which I do every day, that's fantastic. And you got to be fantastic in life. I'm hoping that you have a fantastic life. As a teacher, as a spreader of the positivity. Pollinate positivity, people. With positive thoughts manifest positive action. And conversely, negative does the same. So you shouldn't be around any negative people in your life. Negative thoughts. Get rid of negativity. Promote positivity. Thank you for participating in the 9/11 show. And be fantastic.
Thanks so much. Sorry that wasn't much about 9/11.
It was a little bit. It was good.